If you want to act grown, walk, my father said, and 14 relatives at Sunday dinner listened while my mother told them I had stolen my own car. 3 days later, I was pulled over on Route 9 in Cherry Hill, hands shaking on the steering wheel, while an officer told me the silver Honda Civic I had paid $6,400 for was listed as stolen under a report my father had filed himself. Then, one Tuesday morning, a woman from the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission set a manila folder on a fellowship hall table and said 7 words that changed everything. This registration history is very straightforward. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing where you're all listening from. My name is Lauren Marie Bennett. I'm 23 years old. Now let me take you back to Cherry Hill, New Jersey in September of 2022. By 23, I had already learned that my parents did not experience my independence as a normal part of growing up. They experienced it as a personal insult. My father, Thomas Bennett, liked to say he had given me everything, which was his way of referring to the basics any parent is supposed to provide, then inflating them into debts I could never quite repay. My mother, Denise Bennett, had a softer style, which made her more dangerous. She did not raise her voice much. She used concern the way some people use a blade. She could make a room believe she was afraid of me while I was standing there quietly, holding a paper plate. I was living in a second-floor apartment on Cooper Landing Road then. 1 bedroom, pale beige carpet, 1 window unit that rattled whenever the afternoon heat settled in. It smelled faintly like old dust and lemon cleaner no matter how many times I opened the windows. I had moved out in June after saving for nearly 2 years while finishing my dental assistant certification at Camden County College and working reception at a tanning salon in the evenings. In August, I started a new full-time job at Haddon Family Dental in Haddonfield. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. I wore clean navy scrubs, packed my lunch in a soft gray cooler, and left at 7:15 each morning with my coffee and a chipped white travel mug I had bought at Target for $9. The car mattered because it was the first thing I had acquired without my parents being able to claim they controlled it. A 2011 silver Honda Civic with a tiny dent near the rear bumper, 122,000 miles, and a heater that took forever to warm up. I bought it in July from a woman in Mount Laurel named Patricia Gross for $6,400. I paid with a cashier's check from my own bank account at Republic Bank. Patricia signed the bill of sale at her kitchen table, where she kept a bowl of green apples that made the whole room smell fresh. I remember because the title felt almost warm in my hands, and for the first time in my life I had a document that said something belonged to me. My father hated that car immediately. He hated that I had found it without him. He hated that I had not asked his opinion. Most of all, he hated that he could not use it to prove I still needed him. He would stand in my apartment parking lot with his arms folded over his chest, looking at it as if it had offended him personally. "You bought this without even calling me," he said once. "You always think you're smarter than you are." My mother was standing next to him in a lavender cardigan, smoothing the front of it with both hands, and she said, "He just worries because if anything goes wrong, you'll still expect us to rescue you." I did not expect them to rescue me. What I did do for a few months was help them. That was my mistake. When I first moved out, my younger brother Kyle was behind on his community college tuition, and my parents were making a performance of crisis around it. My father's overtime had been cut. My mother had run up another store credit balance and was pretending not to understand why minimum payments were not enough. They asked if I could bridge things for a month or two. The first month I gave them $400. The second month I paid the electric bill directly, $287.14. By September, it was obvious there was no bridge. There was just me becoming a line item in their budget. So on Sunday, September 18th, I told them no. It was after church at my Aunt Melissa's house in Pennsauken, where the dining room always smelled like roast chicken, black pepper, and those vanilla votive candles she kept burning near the hutch. My father had just asked, in front of everyone, whether I could cover their mortgage shortage until things settled. He said it with that cheerful public voice he used when he wanted to force generosity out of someone. I put my fork down and said, calmly, that I couldn't do that anymore. I said I had rent, insurance, my own car payment plan to myself because I was rebuilding savings and a new job I was trying to hold on to. My mother drew in a breath like I had slapped her. Then my father said the line I opened with, and he said it loud enough for the whole table. That is how quickly they turned provision into accusation. When I left that dinner, my great-aunt Lorraine Shaw was standing in the hallway by the umbrella stand. Lorraine was 68 then. My mother's aunt, a retired school secretary with silver hair set every Friday, low beige heels, and a habit of carrying butterscotch candies in a quilted handbag. She touched my wrist lightly and said, "Drive straight home, honey, and keep your paperwork where your mother cannot get at it." It seemed like a strange thing to say in the moment. Lorraine had a dry voice and the kind of face people underestimated because she smiled often. I nodded, thanked her, and drove away with the smell of gravy still in my sweater. I wish I could say I knew then what was coming. I did not. I thought the dinner was just another family scene I would recover from by Monday. I thought the punishment would be social, not legal. I did not understand yet that some parents, when they realize guilt no longer works, move on to paperwork. That is how long it took them to erase me. 3 days later, on Wednesday, September 21st, I left my apartment at 7:10 in the morning in a light rain. The parking lot shone dull gray under the overcast sky, and wet leaves clung to the curb. I was halfway down Route 9, 2 songs into a local radio station I barely listened to when I saw the lights behind me. My first thought was that I had a taillight out. My second was that maybe I had rolled too long through a yellow light. I pulled over near a gas station with a bright blue awning and waited with both hands on the wheel, because that is what every young woman I know has taught herself to do. The officer who approached was calm, maybe early 40s, clean-shaved, rain darkening the shoulders of his uniform. He asked for my license, registration, and proof of insurance, and I handed them over with that small, automatic smile women use when we want men in uniforms to know we are trying very hard to be easy to deal with. He took one look at the registration and asked me to step out of the vehicle. It was not dramatic. That somehow made it worse. The rain had turned to a mist that settled cold on my forearms. He said very evenly, "Ma'am, this vehicle is entered as stolen." For a second, I genuinely thought he was talking about some other car. Mine was an aging Honda with a coffee stain on the passenger seat and a reusable grocery bag full of old receipts in the trunk. I said there had to be a mistake. He asked who owned the car. I said I did. He asked how long. I said since July. He asked if a Thomas Bennett was my father. When I said yes, my stomach went so suddenly hollow I had to steady myself with one hand on the hood. They had not just threatened me. They had filed something. The officer, whose name tag said Officer Ramirez, was not cruel. I am careful with that memory because accuracy matters. He explained that a stolen vehicle report had been entered with my plate number and vehicle identification number. The reporting party had identified himself as Thomas Bennett and stated his daughter had taken the vehicle without permission after a family dispute. He said there would need to be verification because the entry was active and he could not ignore it on the roadside. He asked if I had title paperwork. I had a photocopy in my glove compartment and the insurance card, but not the original title, because the original was in the lockbox under my bed. He took the copies back to the cruiser. I stood there in wet scrubs with passing cars hissing over the pavement and realized I might be late to a job I had held for less than 6 weeks because my father wanted to make a point. The tow truck came before the explanation did. That detail still sits under my skin. It is one thing to be told your life has become a misunderstanding. It is another to watch chains go under your car while strangers act as if the misunderstanding is already settled. Officer Ramirez did not handcuff me. He did not put me in the cruiser, but he also did not leave me my car. He gave me an incident number, a carbon copy sheet slick with drizzle, and the kind of professional apology that says he knows he is ruining your day inside the boundaries of procedure. I called my office from the gas station curb while the truck pulled away. Behind me, the coffee inside smelled burnt and sweet, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look tired. My office manager, Sonia Patel, answered on the second ring. Sonia was 38, composed, always in sensible shoes, with the kind of quiet competence that made panicked people lower their voices around her. I told her I had been pulled over and my car had been reported stolen by mistake. There was a pause so short someone else might have missed it. Then she said, "Take your time. Get me documents. We will handle work after we understand what happened." That was all. No lecture. No suspicion. Just a place to stand. By 10:30 that morning, my mother had called me 4 times and left 2 voicemails. In the first, she sounded sorrowful. In the second, she sounded offended by my lack of gratitude. "You need to stop making this harder than it has to be," she said. "If you bring the car back and apologize to your father, we can tell them it was a misunderstanding." The wording mattered. Bring the car back. Not prove the car is yours, not resolve confusion. Bring it back, as if ownership were determined by their feelings. I did not call her back. I drove home from the towing yard in an Uber that smelled like pine air freshener and damp fabric, then sat cross-legged on my apartment floor with my lockbox open. Inside were the original titles signed over by Patricia Gross, the notarized bill of sale, my insurance declarations page, my loan ledger from the credit union showing the small personal loan I used for part of the purchase, and the registration receipt from the MVC. I laid them in rows on the rug the way some people lay out jewelry. This was not panic anymore. This was evidence. That afternoon, I went to the Cherry Hill Police Department to ask for the incident report and to make a supplemental statement. The lobby smelled like copier toner and old coffee. Behind the desk sat a woman in reading glasses who did not look up much from her monitor while I explained why I was there. I remember the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint squeak of my sneakers on the tile. When I finally spoke with the desk sergeant, I did not cry. I said my father had filed a stolen car report on a vehicle transferred into my name months after he had no legal ownership interest. I said I wanted that sentence in a report. He took my copies and told me an investigator would review the ownership chain. By evening, the family calls had begun. Aunt Melissa said my father was just desperate. My cousin Jenna said I should drop it because once police are involved, things get ugly. My pastor's wife, Linda Morris, left me a message about honoring parents even when family conflict feels painful. I listened to each message once, saved them, and wrote down the time, date, and what was said in a composition notebook with a blue cover. That notebook became my second nervous system for the next 5 months. Calm is not the absence of fear, it is deciding your fear will not do the filing for you. When I got home that night, there was a white envelope taped to my apartment door. No stamp. My father's block handwriting. Inside was a photocopy of my house key from the old family keyring and a note on yellow legal paper that said, "You are choosing strangers over your family. No signature." I stood in the hallway looking at those words while someone's television played a laugh track through the wall. It struck me then that their story about me had already been written. The only thing left was whether I would allow it to become official. The next morning, Thursday, September 22nd, I took the day off and started making calls in a sequence. Insurance first, motor vehicle commission second, then the tow yard, then a legal aid clinic referral, which sent me to a young attorney in Collingswood named Rebecca Hines, who charged me $200 for the consult and was worth every cent. Rebecca had chestnut hair, a slim gold watch, and a habit of folding her hands when she wanted someone to slow down and be precise. I told her the story from the beginning. She interrupted only twice. Once to ask who had signed the title over to me. Once to ask whether my father had ever been listed on the post-transfer registration. When I said no, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Then this is not a family misunderstanding. This is a false report with damages." There is a particular kind of relief that comes from hearing your private nightmare translated into plain legal language. It does not make the nightmare smaller, it makes it measurable. Rebecca told me to request certified copies of my registration history and title transfer records from the state, get the tow invoice and police incident documentation, and notify my employer in writing with attached proof of lawful ownership. She also told me not to meet my parents alone, not to surrender any documents, and not to answer any phone call that I was unwilling to record in contemporaneous notes. "Paper beats performance," she said, sliding a yellow legal pad toward me. "Your parents are betting on emotion. We are going to make this boring." That line carried me for weeks. I sent Sonia a clean email before noon with scanned copies of the title, registration, insurance, and a brief explanation. I said there was an active dispute caused by a false family report and that I was resolving it through official channels. Sonia wrote back within 8 minutes. "Received, thank you for documenting. Please come in tomorrow if you have transportation." There was no pity in it, which I appreciated. Pity can make you feel like a suspect with better lighting. At 2:15, my father called from a number I did not recognize. I let it ring, then transcribed his voicemail into my notebook. He said, "You are embarrassing us all over town. You know damn well that car came out of this family. If you keep pushing this, don't expect to come back from it. There are threats people make in anger, and there are threats people make after rehearsing them." This was the second kind. My mother texted 10 minutes later. "Please stop before church people hear the wrong version." I saved that too. On Friday, I borrowed Sonia's husband's spare car, a dark green Toyota Corolla that smelled faintly of dog hair and peppermint gum. Sonia handed me the keyring in the office break room before the first patient arrived and said, "Tank is full. Return it Sunday or Monday. No rush." I thanked her more than once. She smiled once very briefly and said, "I know what family theater looks like." That was all the explanation she offered. It was enough. My parents escalated on Saturday. They came to my apartment building at 3 in the afternoon with 2 women from church, both of whom had known me since I was a child. One was Linda Morris, all sympathy and pressed cotton. The other was Carol Webb, who loved being adjacent to conflict if she could name it concern. I saw them through the blinds before they knocked. My mother wore that lavender cardigan again. My father held himself in the doorway as if he was there to retrieve property after an eviction. I did not open the door. I spoke through it and asked them to leave. My mother said in a voice pitched for the women behind her, "Lauren, no one wants this to become a legal issue." My father added, "Bring the car back, and we'll tell the police you calmed down." There are moments when a lie becomes so complete it sounds like absurdity. I stood with one hand on the deadbolt and looked at the grain of the painted wood while my pulse drummed behind my ears. I told them I had already retained counsel. That was not entirely true yet, because I had only had the consult, but I knew by then I would hire Rebecca if I had to sell my sofa to do it. The hallway went quiet. Then Carol Webb, of all people, said softly, "Tom, maybe that's enough for today." It was the first crack I heard in the crowd around them. My older neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Eleanor Pike, opened her door halfway during that scene. Eleanor was 71, widowed, and wore house slippers with tiny blue flowers stitched at the toes. She took in the tableau once, then said in a voice dry as paper, "This hall is monitored, and management does not enjoy church visits that sound like repossession." My father muttered something under his breath and they finally left. Eleanor looked at me through the gap and asked, "You all right, sweetheart?" I said yes, though my knees were shaking. She nodded and closed her door gently. Some people steady you simply by refusing to be impressed. On Monday, the office gossip reached me before lunch. One of the hygienists said a woman had called Saturday asking whether I still worked there and whether the police issue had been resolved. Sonia intercepted the call and ended it. She did not repeat the details to me unless I asked, which I appreciated. Dignity is often just careful restraint. That afternoon, she placed a printed message slip on my desk with the caller ID information and said, "Keep this with your file." Another piece of paper, another nail in the box they were building for themselves. The certified MVC documents took 9 days. 9 days of driving a borrowed car, jumping when unknown numbers lit my screen, and checking my apartment locks twice before bed. 9 days of family members hinting that I was making my parents sick. 9 days of my brother Kyle saying almost nothing. He was 19, narrow-shouldered, always half-folded into himself. He had benefited from their chaos for years by staying quiet enough not to become its target. But the silence was changing him too. One evening he texted, "Dad says this is all because you hate us now." I wrote back, "No, this is because he filed a false report." Kyle did not answer. The MVC envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Thick cream paper, state seal in blue, the kind of letter that makes your breathing change before you even open it. I sat at my kitchen counter with a butter knife and slid the documents out carefully so I would not tear anything. There it was in black and white. Title transfer from Patricia Gross to Lauren Marie Bennett on July 12, 2022. Registration issued to Lauren Marie Bennett the same day. No subsequent ownership entry for Thomas Bennett. No lien in his name. No legal ambiguity at all. He had reported as stolen a vehicle that did not belong to him and had not belonged to him at any point in the state's records. That is how paperwork sounds when it tells the truth. It does not yell, it just stays still. Rebecca filed a formal demand letter on my behalf by certified mail the next morning, addressed to both my father and the Cherry Hill Police Investigative Unit, attaching the MVC records and requesting immediate correction of the stolen vehicle entry, reimbursement for towing and related losses, and preservation of all communications connected to the report. She CC'd the township attorney because she said people become very interested in accuracy when public liability enters the room. I remember signing her retainer agreement with my fingers still cold from the November air coming through her office window. The radiator hissed behind me. Everything ordinary felt sharper then. My father called me that evening, and for the first time sounded uncertain. Not sorry, uncertain. "You hired a lawyer over this?" he asked, as if the offensive part were my response, not his action. I said yes. He said, "You know what this will do to your mother?" There it was, the old family reflex. Turn evidence into cruelty. Turn accountability into abandonment. I told him any further communication should go through counsel. He inhaled to speak again, but all that came out was, "Lauren." Then the line went dead. Community pressure followed like weather. Pastor Reed asked if we could have a healing conversation before things went any further. Aunt Melissa left a voicemail saying court records would follow all of us around. Carol Webb sent a text full of prayer hands and soft coercion. Even Patricia Gross, the woman who sold me the car, called after my father somehow found her number and tried to tell her I had pressured an older woman into paperwork. She was 62, brisk, and not remotely frail. "Honey," she told me over the phone, "your father is either very confused or very committed. I kept copies. If anyone asks, I'll tell them exactly what happened in my kitchen. I nearly cried after hanging up. Not because I was weak, but because being believed after sustained distortion can feel physically overwhelming. By early October, the police investigator assigned to the case, Detective Alan Morse, called to say they were reviewing the original stolen vehicle complaint in light of the title records. His tone was careful. I could hear keyboards in the background and a phone ringing somewhere deeper in the station. He asked whether I would come in to provide a formal statement and copies of all related communications. I brought a folder sorted by date, with tabs. Rebecca had taught me how. The detective looked at the stack, then at me, and said, "You came prepared." I told him I had reason to be. Around this point, I want to ask you something. If your own parent used the police to drag you back into line, what would feel worse to you, the practical damage or the public humiliation? For me, it was the humiliation at first, then the practical damage revealed itself slowly, like bruising. It was the missed hours at work, the tow fees, the Uber receipts, the dread every time a cruiser pulled behind me in traffic. It was also realizing my parents had expected institutions to believe them more quickly than they would ever believe me. If you know that feeling, you know how cold it is. October became paperwork and waiting. Detective Morse requested body camera footage from the traffic stop and the full audio intake attached to the stolen vehicle report. Rebecca pursued reimbursement through civil demand while the police reviewed whether the original filing met the standard for false reporting. My mother switched tactics and began writing me long texts that read like devotionals composed by someone planning a trap. "The enemy loves division," one began. Another said, "You can still choose humility." I did not answer. I exported the messages, printed them, and filed them. Somewhere during that month, I stopped hoping they would come to their senses. Hope had been making me sloppy. Then Kyle called me just after midnight on October 29th. His voice was thin and uneven, and I could hear our father's TV blaring in the background. He said, "I didn't know he'd actually call them." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. He told me my father had spent 2 days after that Sunday dinner asking around for the plate number and VIN. My mother had taken a photo of my registration card once when she rode with me to lunch in August, and the document was in my console. Kyle had seen her looking through her phone the night before the report was filed. He said if your car got flagged, you'd come home and stop acting like this, Kyle told me. Then he started crying, quietly, in the way men cry when they were taught not to make sound. He was complicit in the silence. But he was also 19 and still living in the center of their gravity. That was his reckoning. Not redemption. Recognition. I asked him if he would put any of that in writing. He said he was scared. I told him I understood and that I would not force him. The next morning, he sent me 3 screenshots of messages from our mother. In one, she wrote, "Do not get dramatic with your sister. This was for her own good." In another, "Your father is trying to teach her consequences." I forwarded everything to Rebecca. That is how long it took them to admit they had done it on purpose. By November, the legal side and the social side had begun to separate. Legally, my case was strengthening. Socially, my parents were still performing concern. Those two tracks often run side by side longer than anyone wants to believe. Detective Morse told Rebecca that the ownership records were clear and the original complaint narrative was inconsistent with the state's file. The police cleared the stolen entry and released a written confirmation that there was no basis to consider the vehicle unlawfully possessed. My tow and storage fees totaled $732. My missed shift wages and transportation costs added another $411. Rebecca demanded reimbursement for all of it. My parents did not reimburse me. Instead, they tried to outmaneuver the truth with venue. Every year in early December, our church held a fellowship luncheon after the Women's Holiday Bazaar. The whole family attended. My mother chaired half the floral arrangements and acted as if folding tablecloths were a spiritual gift. This year, despite everything, Aunt Melissa called and said it would be good for everyone if I came. I told her I had no interest in being turned into a cautionary tale over chicken salad. She insisted no one wanted drama, which in families like mine is how you know they are setting the table for it. I only agreed to go after Rebecca told me the MVC had sent a representative to respond to our records request formally because there had been an internal question about whether the false stolen report affected title notation. It was bureaucratic and technical, exactly the kind of thing no one in my family would understand. The representative's name was Marlene Weiss. She was 64, with cropped auburn hair and rectangular glasses, and she planned to attend a meeting at the church fellowship hall that same Tuesday because the bazaar committee rented state parking permits every year, and she handled municipal liaison work. The world is stranger and more useful than people think. Rebecca did not engineer any public confrontation. Neither did I. We simply knew that if paperwork had to be reviewed in person, it would happen where my mother happened to be making centerpieces. And then there was Lorraine. Great Aunt Lorraine had been present at that original Sunday dinner when my father first publicly framed the car as something I had taken. She called me the night before the luncheon and said, "Wear something warm. Those halls are freezing, and your mother likes an audience when she's nervous." Lorraine's voice always sounded half amused, as if she had seen enough of human behavior to stop being surprised by it. She said she would be there by 11 and would save me a seat near the back. "I'm too old for nonsense and too young for burial," she added. "So I plan to watch this upright." The day of the luncheon was cold and brilliantly clear. The church parking lot smelled faintly of wet pavement and pine wreaths. Inside, the fellowship hall was all fluorescent light, metal chairs, and the mixed scents of coffee, frosting, and reheated casserole. The women had set up raffle baskets along one wall with curling red ribbon. I wore a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and small silver hoops. My hair was down because it always made me feel less armored. Oddly enough, Sonia had hugged me that morning before work and slipped a thermos of tea into my hands. "For after," she said. That was her whole speech. I found Lorraine at a round table near the coat rack. She wore a navy wool coat over a cream blouse and had a small notebook open beside her plate, though whether she intended to write anything down or simply wanted others to see that she might, I could not tell. "You look steady," she said as I sat down. I told her I was trying. She patted my hand once. Her skin was cool and dry. "Trying is what records are for," she said. My mother spotted me within minutes. I saw the shift in her posture from across the room. She did not come over immediately because she was greeting people and because an audience means more if it gathers naturally. My father arrived later, which was unusual for him at church events. He usually preferred to make my mother do the social part while he looked put upon in a doorway. That morning, he walked in carrying a bakery box, chin high, trying to wear normal like a suit. Kyle came with him. He looked tired. The first confrontation happened around 12:15, between the raffle table and the coffee urns. My mother approached with Linda Morris and Carol Webb drifting in her wake. She smiled with only the upper half of her face. "Lauren, I'm so glad you came. Maybe now we can talk like family," I said politely, that any necessary communication could continue through counsel. People within earshot grew suddenly interested in their napkins. My father joined us and said, low and tight, "How much longer are you going to drag this out?" I said. "Until the record matches the truth, that was all." He laughed, then, a short, ugly sound meant to make me sound self-important. "Truth? Over a car?" My mother added, "You really want the whole church hearing about this?" Lorraine, from her chair 5 feet away, did not raise her voice when she said, "Denise, the church has been hearing your version for weeks." It was such a clean sentence. My mother turned toward her, startled for one real second. There are older women who hold families together, and older women who simply refuse to help lies travel farther. Lorraine was the second kind. At 12:27, Marlene Weiss from the Motor Vehicle Commission entered, carrying a manila folder and wearing a camel coat with a state ID clipped to the lapel. She was there for the parking permit paperwork and to return a set of corrected forms to the church administrator, who happened to be speaking with my mother near the stage. I knew Marlene only from a phone call the previous week in which she had confirmed she would need a signature acknowledging receipt of the title history clarification. She had no idea she was stepping into a family war. To her, this was a paperwork stop between two more ordinary tasks. What happened next is the reason I still believe in the strange usefulness of bureaucracy. The church administrator, a nervous man named Peter Holcomb, saw me nearby and said, "Oh, Lauren, this has your name on it too, doesn't it?" He meant nothing by it. He simply wanted the right person to sign the right line. Marlene opened the folder on the nearest table, next to a tray of powdered cookies. She adjusted her glasses and began explaining, in the flat, efficient voice of someone who has reviewed too many forms to care about anyone's family politics. There was confusion raised regarding ownership history on a silver 2011 Honda Civic New Jersey plate ending in 486. We reviewed the title chain and registration records. They are very straightforward. Title transferred from Patricia Gross directly to Lauren Marie Bennett on July 12, 2022. Registration issued same date. No ownership interest by Thomas Bennett appears before or after transfer. The room did not go silent all at once. It thinned. Conversation stopped in rings like a ripple moving through water. Marlene kept going because she did not realize she was reading out a verdict. For the state to classify a vehicle as stolen under a complainant's claim, the complainant must have a lawful possessory basis. In this file, there is none. So any representation that the vehicle was taken from Thomas Bennett is inconsistent with the motor vehicle record. Then she slid a line across the page with her pen and said to the church administrator, "I just need signatures acknowledging receipt." That was the reveal. Not dramatic music, Not me standing up, a state employee explaining ownership history over cookies and coffee. My mother put one hand on the back of a chair as if she had misjudged the floor. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked not furious, which would have been familiar, but briefly unguarded, small. Kyle stared at the table. Linda Morris stepped back a half pace without meaning to. Carol Webb fixed her eyes on the folder as if truth might become less embarrassing if treated like office supply inventory. Then Detective Morse walked in. He was not there for us either. He had arranged through Peter Holcomb to drop off a courtesy copy of the cleared vehicle incident because the church had fielded several worried calls from congregants after my parents had spread the story that their daughter had taken off in family property and become unstable. He did not know the timing would converge. He simply crossed the room in a dark overcoat, holding another folder, and said, to no one in particular, "I was told Thomas Bennett is here. I have the corrected disposition from our office." He saw the faces, saw Marlene with her documents, and stopped just enough to understand he had arrived at the center of something. He was a professional, so he did not perform. He looked at my father and said evenly, "Sir, your stolen vehicle complaint has been closed as unfounded based on ownership documentation. Further review of the filing is ongoing." He turned to Peter Holcomb and added, "Since the congregation was contacted regarding a supposed theft, I thought it appropriate to provide the correction in writing." Then he handed over the paper. My father said, "There must be some mistake." It was the smallest sentence I had ever heard from him. Detective Morse did not argue. He simply said, "No, sir," that was all. Lorraine rose from her chair then, not quickly, because at 68 she did nothing quickly unless necessary. She took out her reading glasses, unfolded them, and said, "Peter, would you mind reading the date on the transfer aloud?" Some people here seem attached to confusion. Peter, poor man, looked as if he wanted the floor to open under him. But he took the page. In a room of maybe 40 people with raffle baskets and paper snowflakes hanging from the ceiling, he read, July 12, 2022. Then he read the line that no ownership interest by Thomas Bennett appeared in the state record. His voice shook on the second sentence. That is how long it took for the town version to crack. My mother did not give a speech. She did not cry on cue. She looked at Marlene, then at Detective Morse, then at the floor. Her lips moved once without sound. My father's right hand twitched at his side the way it always did when he wanted to point at someone and knew he should not. He started to say my name and stopped after the first syllable. Kyle put both hands over his face for a second, then lowered them and looked directly at me. Not pleading, just ashamed. Nobody asked me to explain myself after that. That was the gift of an outsider reveal. I did not have to become eloquent under pressure. The state did not care about my tone. The detective did not care about my family hierarchy. They cared about records. That is why institutions can be dangerous in the wrong hands and salvific in the right moment. They do not love you, but sometimes they are immune to performance. The days after the luncheon were oddly quiet at first. Silence can feel like concussion after sustained noise. My parents did not call me for 4 days. Aunt Melissa sent one text that simply said, "I had no idea." Linda Morris mailed a card with a verse inside and no apology. Carol Webb, to her credit, called and said, "I should not have gone to your apartment that day. I let your mother call it concern, and it wasn't. It was not absolution, it was a factual sentence." I appreciated that more than tears. On the legal side, things moved faster once public embarrassment attached itself to the file. Detective Morse informed Rebecca that the false complaint matter had been referred to the municipal prosecutor for review. I was reimbursed for the tow fees, storage charges, lost wages, and transportation expenses within 6 weeks, not by grace, but through pressure. The check arrived on county letterhead because by then my father had realized handing me cash would look like admission. The amount was $1,143 and change. I deposited it on a gray Friday afternoon and felt almost nothing. Money repairs the surface of certain harms. It does not restore oxygen to the days they stole. Work improved. Sonia never asked me for emotional updates, only practical ones. She kept my schedule steady, shielded me from curious questions, and once, when a patient mentioned hearing something odd about my family, she said, "There was an administrative error and it has been corrected." Then she changed the subject to insurance forms. There is real love in that kind of containment. At Christmas, she gave me a pair of wool socks and a card that read, "For warm feet and continued documentation." I still have it. Kyle moved out in February and rented a room with 2 friends in Maple Shade. He texted me a picture of an air mattress on the floor and one lamp with no shade and wrote, "It's ugly, but it's quiet." We met for coffee 2 weeks later at a diner off Route 30. He looked older. He told me he had known our mother took the registration photo and that he hated himself for not warning me sooner. I told him remorse and repair are not the same thing, but remorse is where repair starts if a person is serious. He nodded and cried once, briefly, while looking at the sugar packets. He is still my brother. That does not erase what his silence cost me. As for my parents, consequences unfolded without my help. Once truth enters a church circle with documents attached, it travels on its own. No speech from me could have matched the power of Peter Holcomb quietly confirming that a state representative and a detective had both corrected the story in the fellowship hall. People who had repeated my mother's version stopped repeating it. Some avoided me out of embarrassment. Some avoided my parents because liars make communities feel unsafe. My father resigned from his volunteer treasurer role at church before anyone formally asked him to. My mother stepped down from the bazaar committee the following spring, citing stress. I did not engineer any of it that mattered to me. Lorraine came by my apartment one Sunday in March with a lemon loaf wrapped in wax paper and a new butterscotch candy tucked into the ribbon. She sat at my tiny kitchen table beneath the humming light fixture and said, "You know, Denise thought she could use witness count as proof. The more people who heard her, the truer she imagined it became." I sliced the loaf while the kettle warmed. "Did you always know she was like this?" I asked. Lorraine considered that. Rain tapped against the window. "I knew she loved control more than truth," she said. "I did not know she would hand that love to the police." Then she looked at me over the rim of her teacup and added, "You did very well, Lauren. Quietly is still very well." That line stayed with me because women like us are often taught that if we do not scream, maybe it did not hurt enough to count. But quiet has its own force. Quiet can gather copies, preserve dates, retain counsel, and survive a room full of people waiting for you to become unreasonable. Quiet can outlast theater. Do I forgive them? Not fully. I am not interested in performing a holiness that my body has not caught up to. When a police cruiser pulls behind me at night, even now, my shoulders still tense before my mind reminds them there is nothing to fear. When my phone rings from an unknown number, some small part of me still braces for my mother to have found a new way to sound injured. Forgiveness may come in pieces or not at all. Peace, for me, arrived first in smaller forms. It arrived when I renewed my registration by myself and held the new card under the kitchen light, clean and correct. It arrived when my lease renewed and I realized my apartment no longer felt temporary. It arrived when Patricia Gross sent me a Christmas card that said, "Still glad that car went to you." It arrived when Sonia promoted me to lead front desk coordinator the next summer and trusted me with the training binder because she said I was steady under pressure. It arrived in forms my parents would never recognize because none of them looked like surrender. These days, my chosen family is ordinary. Sonia and her husband invite me for soup when the weather turns cold. Eleanor Pike across the hall still knocks once a month to bring me a clipped article or ask if I want half a pie she baked too large for one person. Kyle comes by sometimes with grocery store flowers and awkward apologies disguised as updates about work. Lorraine calls every other Friday and asks, "Anything new or are we grateful for boring?" Usually we are grateful for boring. Last month, on a soft June evening, 4 of us sat on my apartment balcony with paper plates balanced on our knees while the air smelled like cut grass and someone's charcoal grill 2 buildings over. Sonia had brought pasta salad. Eleanor wore a light cardigan even though it was warm. Kyle was trying badly to assemble a folding side table from a box without the instructions. Lorraine watched him for exactly 30 seconds before saying, "Hand me the screws before you ruin a perfectly innocent Tuesday." We all laughed, the kind that comes from safety, not relief. That is the ending I wanted more than revenge. Not reconciliation, not a grand apology, just a life in which I no longer had to build every day around anticipating their next move. They used a police report to try to turn my independence into a crime. They wanted a tow truck, a file number, and a little public shame to send me back through the old front door. Instead, they taught me how to document, how to stand still, and how to let the right strangers do the speaking when truth finally walked into the room. If you're in something like this right now, make it boring. Save the voicemail. Get the record. Write the date down. Tell one calm person the exact truth. Let paperwork be louder than panic. The people who count on your silence are rarely prepared for your file folder. And if an older woman in sensible shoes quietly tells you to keep your paperwork safe, listen to her. She may already see the shape of